Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of Doing My Schoolwork. Today's episode is on traditional Inuit medicine and how it changed with the arrival of colonizers. To start us off, let's take a look at Inuit medicine because it is fascinating. I find it fascinating because it relies on the limited number of resources that can be found in northern Canada. For example, to prevent frostbite, you would wash your hands in new snow. If it was too late and you already had frostbite, the affected area was covered in soft snow. Snow was used to rinse out salt from the eyes to prevent snow blindness as well. Algae was often used as a pad during periods in labor, and in the event of postpartum hemorrhaging, shredded grass was placed partially in the vagina and the woman was given tea to strengthen her. For seizures, it was important that no one touched the foam coming from the person's mouth, and once the seizure ran its course, the person was to eat a whole loon or red-throated loon, starting with the gallbladder. These are just a few examples of traditional medicine used by the Inuit, but now we're going to move on to contact with the Europeans. Colonizers didn't make contact with the Inuit until around the 1500s, with French whaling and fishing fleets. This contact was brief and infrequent, as French fishermen were only present during whaling season. The first Christian mission station was established in 1771. However, even with this, given the aggressively nomadic lifestyle of the Inuit, contact remained limited. It wasn't until the 1930s that the Canadian government came in and really started, for lack of a better word, screwing things up. The contact did result in language shifts, though, as Inuit adjusted their dialects to include enough English to trade with fishermen. And of course, with the creation of the mission station, there were conversions to Christianity, but it was still so limited that the effects weren't as damaging in comparison to other places. As a result of the initial sparse contact, traditional medicine didn't suffer, well, not yet anyway. And during the time before the 1930s, traditions and practices continued to be passed down, and most importantly, they were documented. And I don't mean documented by some European missionary, I mean documented by the Inuit themselves. This in turn allowed for the traditions and practices to become more concrete and less susceptible to being completely lost over time. We also need to consider what other options there were in terms of alternative medicine. The Europeans tended to treat a stomach ache with cocaine and leeches, both of which were not very common in northern Canada. They also had no experience with the harsh climate of the north, meaning really traditional Inuit medicine was the only option available. This can also be applied in a modern context, unfortunately. Communities far up north have very little resources, mainly because the government doesn't feel like spending the money to send them, but I digress. Considering the lack of quote-unquote Western resources, traditional medicine is still used because it remains the only option. On a side note, given that the Inuit are still here, the Western world may want to take a look at their medicine because they're doing something right. All in all, it's super important to note that this does not mean the Inuit did not suffer at the hands of colonization. They absolutely did, and today are largely ignored by the Canadian government in terms of any kind of support or reparations. This project merely comments on the beneficial effects of delayed and infrequent contact at the beginning, which can be seen today in the Yukon General Hospital, where Western doctors work with Inuit elders to offer a mixture of Western medicine and traditional medicine, which is pretty cool. That about wraps up today's episode of Doing My Schoolwork. Thank you for joining me, and good luck with your own schoolwork. You're gonna be great.